Welcome to Unlocking Science. Our goal is to glorify God by studying and unlocking the secrets of His amazing creation. I'm your host, Mr. P, and today we're going to talk about an invisible realm.
That's
a
right.
magical invisible realm. Well, not quite magical, but very tiny and very small. And I'm joined by Dr. Georgia Purdom, and she's going to talk to us about microbes.
I am. So, we call the study of microbes microbiology. Okay?
And micro, of course, means small. So
right,
little tiny biology is what we're going to be talking about today.
Right.
But there's a lot of really big concepts in little tiny biology.
They're very complex. And so we're going to do a couple episodes on microbiology. And so we'll talk about some of the things now and some of the things later, because you can't put it all in one talk, so to speak, or one presentation on this. So I need to borrow Claude's pointer there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will be following along on Ken Ham's Facebook page. So this is a live episode, and we'll be looking for your comments and feedback. So if you've got questions about microbiology, and our episode title today is Spicy Bacteria. And you'll figure out why we've titled it that way in a few minutes. But Dr. Purdom's going to teach us a little bit about bacteria.
I am. So I actually, even though I'm a geneticist by training, microbes, especially bacteria, were something that I used in the lab a lot as a tool, basically for studying certain things in genetics. And then I had the opportunity to teach microbiology at the college level. I've did that for several years, and now I actually do it online for nurses. I teach them about microbiology. So it's something that I've had a lot of experience with, and I've done some research on it even here since I joined Answers in Genesis and published a couple of papers in that area. So even though I'm a geneticist, I love talking and love learning about microbes and microbiology. So we're going to focus on a specific class of microbes, and that is a bacteria. Now we can also have like fungi and algae and protozoans. Okay, those are other types of microbes, but we're going to specifically focus on this particular class now. So as we already said, bacteria are microscopic. Okay, so they're really, really tiny. So in order to be able to see most of them, and I'm going to tell you why in a minute, you have to have a microscope to do that. Now they are unique from other types of cells because they have a cell wall. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a minute because most other organisms don't have cell walls, with the exception of plants and fungi. They do, but most other things don't. We don't. And then the other thing that makes bacteria unique is they don't have a nucleus and they don't have what we call organelles. So organelles are like tiny little organs inside our cells. Okay, we have them, but actually bacteria do not. And I'm going to show you a picture in a minute because we're going to talk about the difference between what a prokaryote is and a eukaryote. Okay, so those are some big words, I know, but you can't talk about microbiology without those. So prokaryote and eukaryote. And if you want to be correct grammatically, so Roger here is really into like proper English grammar, okay? So bacteria is plural, bacterium is singular,
yes,
okay?
That's an important point.
That's an important point. It's some grammar. Okay, go ahead.
We've got people joining us. Hello to Gianna and Isabella, our faithful viewers.
Awesome.
And we've got the McKelvey kids. Jenna is 14, Andrew 11, Anya 7 coming to us. And then Craig joining us and several other people. So lots of people jumping on. Get those questions in. We'll see if we can answer them.
I love answering those. All right. So this is a prokaryotic cell, a bacteria, and this is a eukaryotic cell. Now, the words prokaryote. Okay, so basically this means before kernel or nut. All right, and eu means true. Kernel or nut. Now you might think, what do nuts have to do with bacteria? Okay, so the nut in this case is the nucleus. All right, so they're saying these have a true nucleus. Okay, so the genetic material, DNA, is contained inside of that. Bacteria have DNA. That's what you're seeing in the middle here, but it's not enclosed inside of a nucleus, okay, that has a membrane around it. Now, they call them, now this is a little bit of evolution coming in here, all right, prokaryote, before the nucleus. So they're going to say these are some of our earliest, so to speak, our earliest ancestors did not have a nucleus. That came later in evolution, right? So that's why it's called basically that, before the nucleus. And so anyway, that creeps in a little bit even here, and we'll talk more about that later. All right, so there's 3 basic shapes of bacteria, and that is the cocci, which is the spear, or it's round, the bacilli, which is the rod, and the spirili, which is the spiral. So those are our big words for the day, right?
So our big science words of the day are words that you're going to see when we talk about bacteria. Oftentimes the names of bacteria will indicate something about their shape as well. So if we think about a common bacteria that causes pneumonia, they're pneumococcal. So you can see the cocci in there. So if we were to look at a pneumococcal bacteria, we'd expect it to be a spherical shape, a round shape. Now there's a little bit, she'll show some pictures here in a little bit. There's a little bit of blurry lines. Is this a rod or is this a sphere? And some things like that. But the spirili are really easy to identify.
They're cool. There's one called Treponema pallidum that's very, see, got another big word in there. That one I can pronounce. So they're really neat looking spirals. So these are the 3 basic shapes. Now I want to mention bacteria don't look this pretty as far as colors go, all right? These are enhanced. They are actual pictures, but they're enhanced pictures as far as the color goes so you can see them easier. So this is the cocci, this is the bacilli, okay, it's like a rod, okay, you can see that here. And this is the spiral, okay, or spirili, right? So it looks as a corkscrew sort of shape to it. Okay, now there's these 3 basic shapes then can be arranged in various ways, okay? So some bacteria tend to take on a certain arrangement, basically, like to hang out with each other, so to speak, in a certain way, because bacteria are unicellular, one, okay? They have one cell. We are multicellular because we have multiple cells, okay? So that's another difference there. So you can see some of the different ones. So for example, Streptococcus pneumoniae, which can cause pneumonia, is typically a diplococci, okay, cocci, bleh. So it hangs out in 2s, so to speak. Streptococcus, again, coccus, you can see there is the round. Pyogenes, that one causes scarlet fever, I believe, they hang out in sort of these chains like this. You can have tetrads with 4, all kinds, it can be a cluster. This is Staphylococcus aureus, which is causes staph infections. So this one is like a cluster, basically, almost like grape-like cluster. This is a chain of bacillus. This is Bacillus anthracis. This causes anthrax, okay? So it hangs out in a chain like this. You can also have some weird ones, like Vibrio cholera. This causes cholera, okay? And it is a curved rod. So you can have all these amazing shapes. And the next time we talk about microbiology, we're going to talk about even some more really cool shapes that certain types of bacteria can take on. All right, now let's talk a little bit about the size of bacteria. So I'm going to go from the smallest to the greatest, all right, that we know of right now. And this changes literally all the time because we keep discovering these things. So the smallest bacteria that we know of currently is Candidatus actinomyrina minuta, okay, minuta, right, small. It is a marine bacteria that was discovered, and its volume, so how much space basically is inside of it, is 1% of E. coli, right? And E. coli is a pretty common gut bacteria, soil bacteria, but it's 1% of that. It's so small, I actually could not find any pictures of it. It's hard to take a picture of something that tiny, okay, without really high levels of microscopy to do that.
Yep. And when we think about E. coli, it's a common bacteria that we use to compare other things to within microbiology.
Because
it's really common. We can find it about anywhere. It's all over your body in lots of different places. It's easy to culture, and so it's one of the kind of the standard bugs that we work with. Now, a lot of times we'll use slang terms like this is a bug, but it's really not. We say we got a flu bug or we got a cold bug things. So these are unicellular, not multicellular, so they're much smaller than bugs. And these things are so small, without high power magnification through a magnifying or through a microscope, we're not going to be able to see them at all.
And even to be able to see them, we have to stain them. So we have to actually stain certain aspects, so to speak, of the bacteria, especially the cell wall. That's a big popular one. Maybe I'll talk about that in the next episode.
Yeah, that'd be a good point.
How we can see them, because otherwise they're transparent and you really can't see them very well. So. All right, now let's go to the biggest bacteria. Okay, this one wins the prize. And I remember when this one was actually discovered because it was so big. They made a big deal about it. So this is Thiomargarita nambiensis. There's a mouthful, all right? And so this is called the sulfur pearl of Namibia. Yeah, there we go. All right, it also is a marine bacteria. So the smallest and the biggest tend to be marine ones. Its volume, unlike the other one that was 1% the volume of E. coli, this is 8 times the volume of E. coli. So it goes the opposite way, and it's actually so large you can see it with the naked eye, which is pretty cool. I don't know of any other bacteria that you can see with the naked eye. So this is a picture of it in a microscopic setting, okay? And it has, I think it's called the sulfur pearl because you can see all these little tiny vacuoles and things inside, not vacuoles, but little things inside of it. I think they're sulfur because it's a sulfur.
Yeah, they're sequestering.
Right,
there probably are
the
vacuoles that are, they're not formal
vacuoles in the
because
truest
that's
sense,
an organelle, but they're sequestering that sulfur.
Right.
So I believe those are found in a specific lake that's high in sulfur.
Yeah. So this is actually the bacteria. One cell of the bacteria is what you're seeing right here. And this is a fly for comparison. So it's about the size of a fly eye. So you can actually see it without a microscope.
Which is gigantic when we think about bacteria.
Yeah. And so just to give you an idea, and so now this is not exactly to scale because that's impossible for me to do. But this little mouse down here, we'll say, represents Candidatus, okay, the smallest bacteria that we know of. This is E. coli, it's a rabbit, okay. Now actually, it's probably smaller than that, but it's hard to show it on the screen. This, okay, if you want to do a size comparison, a mouse to a rabbit, this is Thiomargarita, the Empire State Building. So, that's how big of a difference we're talking about, okay, in the microscopic world. But just to give you an idea, it's like comparing a mouse to the Empire State Building, from the smallest to the largest. So hopefully that gets it in your head a little bit, because that's kind of hard. Do we have any questions?
We've got kind of a statement here that you might be able to address, and I think you might talk about this a little bit later. Craig says, not all bacteria are bad. That's probably in response to my statement that E. coli are all over your body.
Yep. We're going to talk about that later, so I'm going to hold that thought, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. All right, so how do bacteria reproduce? The most common form of bacterial reproduction is asexual. Okay, asexual means they don't have a male or a female. Okay, every single bacteria can reproduce, and they reproduce by what's called binary fission, right? And that's the most common. And I'm going to show you a little movie of that and explain that a little bit. They do have a form of sexual reproduction. I put that in quotes, because it's technically not sexual. There's not male and female, but there's what we call opposite mating types. And they will actually form a little structure between themselves and pass genetic material. So it's kind of a way that they can do that. So this just shows you binary fission. So this is what we call the bacterial chromosome. It's actually a giant circle, but it's all like blobbed up here. It will make a copy of itself, okay, so it duplicates, and then the cell will continue to grow and grow, and then it just pinches off kind of in the middle, and you now have 2 cells. So it's a very simplistic form of reproduction, but it gets the job done, okay? So they can actually do this very, very quickly. So this is just a video that kind of shows that, and you can see them just, again, they're dividing. So the genetic material duplicates, and then the cell continues to grow, and eventually it just cuts itself in 2, basically. So you have 2 cells. So that's going really, really fast because bacteria tend to do that. E. coli, I think, can make a copy of itself basically once every 20 minutes.
Yeah, about 20 minutes of a duplication rate. So can you imagine if something like a mouse or a rabbit could duplicate itself every 20 minutes, think about how the population would explode with those things.
Because in the lab, we would typically start a culture, and we would come in the next day, so you're talking 24 hours, and it would start out very clear, the broth, and the next day it's completely cloudy, because all this, because every time, because it's growing exponentially, so it just goes 2, 4, 8, 16, and you just get a ton of bacteria in a short period of time. Okay, so one of the main bacterial roles is decomposition and recycling nutrients. Let's just say the world would be a very stinky place without bacteria, okay?
And the bacteria make the world a stinky place.
Well,
Both.
it's both. Them to decompose and break things down. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But this shows the nitrogen cycle, okay? Because nitrogen is in the air, but we can't use this form of nitrogen. It's a gas, okay? We can't use it. We need nitrogen. Whoops. I'm going to hit my microphone here. We need nitrogen, but we can't use it in this form. So it comes into the soil, and one of the places that we have bacteria is some plants like peanuts and beans. They're called legumes. They have these little nodules on their roots where nitrogen-fixing bacteria live. So they'll take the nitrogen in gas form and make it into a form of nitrogen that can be utilized by the plant, right? We have nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil. Again, they take it from the gas and they form it into ammonium, right? And then there's other bacteria that form it into nitrates, and there's other bacteria that form it into nitrates. And it gets formed into all these different things that can then be utilized by plants, right? And we want that. And then there's other bacteria that will break it down and put it back into the air. So it's this whole cycle, and it's really, really needed so we get nutrients in forms that we can use them in, because we need nitrogen for our proteins, for example.
Yeah, and so that's an example how God has structured our
Right.
earth to be able to take the nitrogen-rich atmosphere that we have, which is helpful when we're breathing and other things like that, and it's why things don't ignite all over the place. If the atmosphere was mostly oxygen, for example, we'd be in trouble. Fires
Right.
would get out of control really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So we can take that from the air and fix it into these plants, and then the plants can pass it to
Right.
animals, just like God commanded from the beginning that animals were to be eating the green plants. So
Right.
this is a cycle that's been in place from the beginning.
They're working, we call this a lot of times, especially with the roots, it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a good relationship. They benefit each other, so to speak. So, all right, they're in your gut. Okay, and we think about this a lot. And we have a lot, we sometimes think of bacteria as being bad, right? But a lot of them are very, very good. We have a lot of good bacteria in our gut. One of the things they do is they make vitamin K, right, from the things that we eat. That's good because you need vitamin K to clot your blood. Okay, so we need that one. They break down food that we cannot break down our own. We don't have the right enzymes or proteins to break them down, but bacteria do. They also break down poisons, which is a really good thing. And so that helps us as well. And they control the growth of disease-causing bacteria. Now, we want that because they tend to outgrow the bad guys, so to speak, and they keep the bad guys from growing and reproducing, and we want that because otherwise it can lead to things like disease, diarrhea, those types of things. And so we want a healthy gut bacteria. They also are involved in what's called bioremediation, so there's a big word too, in pollution cleanup. So they can break down things like plastics, oil, so they can be useful in that way because sometimes we don't have good ways to break those things down, and they're a lot of our waste products, so they can be used to do those kinds of things. They're extremely adaptable, okay? They can use a lot of what's around them, so to speak. They have some economic uses as well, things like yogurt, okay, lactobacillus is in that.
That made my breakfast possible this morning.
Yeah, cheese, lots of cheeses use different bacteria to make them, and vinegar. Chemicals like perfumes that ladies might put on or colognes that men might. Acetone, so nail polish remover, they can help with that. And drugs. Actually, a lot of our antibiotics that you take come from bacteria. Streptomyces is the one that tends to be the most popular, so to speak, in forming a lot of the antibiotics. And so they help us with our medications that we take.
And even things like insulin is produced inside of a bacteria. They used to have to make it inside of horses, I believe, and then they were able to transfer that gene material into a bacteria that then produces the insulin as a waste product, and we can harvest that very efficiently.
Because they grow so fast, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a horse compared to bacteria, you can reproduce a lot of it in a very short period of time. All right, now some people might say, okay, so they're living things, and what day were they created on?
All right, we actually had a question about that. Somebody asked, were bacteria around before the fall and before sin?
Yeah, they were. Because bacteria are essentially links between the physical world and the biological world, okay? We're part of the biological world. Plants, animals, all that is part of the biological world, like I showed in the nitrogen cycle, right? So they're taking things from the physical world, like the air and the soil, and they're putting it into a form that we can use as biological organisms, so to speak. We cannot eat rocks and soil. Well, we can, but we shouldn't.
My kids used to. They'd get in the sandbox and shove that.
Yeah, it's not a good plan,
There's not much
okay?
benefit from that for our bodies. It
Right,
just passes right through.
we can't convert it to something that we can use, but the bacteria can. Things like nitrogen, carbon, sulfur, phosphorus. We use that in our proteins. We use it in our DNA. We need that, but the only way we can get it is if the bacteria convert it to a form we can use. So pretty cool. So
Very
they had to be
important
around
roles.
from the beginning.
Yeah.
We couldn't survive without that. So one of the, Dr. Joseph Francis, who's a creationist, who was actually one of my professors in college, he has come up with the term biomatrix, all right? So it's this idea that there's this link, right? They're a biomatrix between the physical and the biological world. So they likely were created on multiple days of creation week. And the reason I say that is because it really depends on what they were interacting with. So we might have soil bacteria and plant bacteria associated with plants on days 3, bacteria associated with flying and swimming creatures on day 5, and bacteria associated with land animals on day 6, and human beings, obviously. So probably different days depending on when they were needed.
But we don't have any explicit statement of
Nope.
that in the text. So
We do
these
not.
are kind of ideas we kind of formulate to think about a best explanation we can come up that's still consistent
Yeah.
with what we know scientifically and
Right.
what the Bible teaches us.
Bacteria is not in the Bible, the word at least,
No.
is not in the Bible. So we just have to infer from everything we know about them when they were created. All right, let's go through some fun bacterial facts, because I always like to do these. Your human body. Okay, so you have 30 trillion cells in your body, right?
That's a lot of zeros there.
Yep, but you have 39 trillion bacterial cells. Now, some people might say you're more bacteria than you are human, but because the bacterial cells are so small, by weight, you're more human cells, but they do make up more cells, okay, of you, so to speak. Then they're in you, they're on you, they're everywhere. I always told my students microbiology is a study of a lot of things you really didn't want to know, okay?
Absolutely.
I love it, but each square inch of your skin has 32 million bacteria, each square inch. And you should wash your hands, and that's a good thing, but there are bacteria that reside persistently on your skin. You will never be able to wash them off, okay, because they're there.
And they give us a benefit because they help, like you said earlier, they help control disease-causing
Right.
bacteria that would come in and take over.
Yeah, that's my next point, right? Bacteria are very helpful. They estimate that probably less than 5%, and I'm going to guess it's probably less than 1% of bacteria actually cause disease. Most are very, very helpful. 1 gram of topsoil has 10 billion bacteria in it. That's a lot. And I will say that your mouth has a lot of bacteria too. Human bites are actually the most dangerous types of bites that people can get, so don't bite your brothers and sisters.
That's always a good rule of thumb.
That's always a good rule of thumb. And things like, okay, so kids, you're going to love me for this, because here's what I'm going to tell you. Dried fruits and raisins, which your parents want to feed you because it's healthy and all that, it is healthy, I do not doubt that, but it tends to get stuck in your teeth, and the bacteria love it, and they start to eat it, and they make an acid, and then that decays your teeth. Chocolate is actually better for you, okay? You can tell me.
That is a great tip. And if you want to blend them both, have a chocolate-covered raisin.
That's what I said. That's my favorite.
But that's
so.
why it's important to brush our teeth and,
Right.
and avoid that type of tooth decay and cavities and things.
We don't want those things in there.
Okay, Isabella has a question for you.
Okay.
She asks, do bacteria just float around in the air all around us?
Yep.
Yep. Every breath that you take, you are inhaling probably millions of bacteria. They're everywhere. We use the big word, they're ubiquitous.
Yes,
we
ubiquitous.
cannot get away from bacteria. They're floating around. But thankfully, God has given us designs in our bodies to help capture some of those harmful things. So the little hairs that are inside of your nose are coated with mucus that we call snot, and the dust and the bacteria particles stick to that. So our nose acts like a filter, And so boogers are basically little balls of mucus and bacteria dried up into a
and earwax does the same thing in your ears.
Earwax does in your ears. Mucus in the back of your throat does it if you breathe in through your throat. So all of those things are, they're everywhere. You can't avoid bacteria, but it's not bad. It's just the fact of life.
And we'll talk more about that in the next episode too, how they can live in some pretty extreme conditions. So the number of bacteria in the world has been estimated to be 5 billion trillion. There are more bacteria on the earth than there are stars in the known universe. Okay, so that's a pretty cool fact. 1 million bacteria can fit on a pinhead. We're talking average sized bacteria, obviously, things like E. coli.
E. coli.
In 5 hours, one cell can give rise to 1 billion offspring. Okay, so that's why I said you're gonna make a lot of these things in a very short period of time, because their division process is very simple. If you lined up bacteria end to end, the bacteria on Earth would stretch 10 billion light years. Okay, so what I'm saying is that's literally to the edge of the known universe. Okay, so they're very small, and there's a ton of them. That's why we said they're everywhere.
So I called this an invisible world.
It is,
but we can't see it, but it's actually in the world all around us.
And most bacteria have yet to be identified. We know of them through their DNA, but we're not able to culture them like in a plate or in the lab. We know of about 9,000 species of bacteria, but it's estimated there are 10 million species of bacteria, so it's huge. Okay, now, so this one's going to go a little longer, because man, this takes a while.
No, this is
That's
this
okay.
Is
Okay, good.
Let me interrupt you there. Tim has a question, and I think it'll lead into what we're going to be talking about here. He says, what are the main results of a bacterial infection that are harmful? Okay.
So it depends on the type of bacteria, what the results are going to be. So for example, Helicobacter pylori is a bacteria that causes ulcers. Okay, so it'll lead to holes in your stomach lining, which can be obviously very painful.
So that would be, we classify that as a tissue damaging bacteria. So it actually causes damage in the tissue. So necrotic would be a big fancy word for that. So there are some, like if you get a boil on your skin, that's where the bacteria multiply so rapidly that they're destroying the tissue, and then your body comes in with its immune response and also kind of destroys the tissue because it's trying to get rid of that. So we can get some of the damaged tissues.
Like flesh-eating bacteria. A lot of people have heard of those. If you've ever had pus, pus is good, because pus is the white blood cells that have basically come to the rescue and given their life for you, so that you can survive. They basically die after they ingest so many bacteria. I think they can usually ingest about 12 bacteria before they die. So that's a sign of an infection, though. It's a sign that something's there, and you might need to do something about that. Some bacteria elicit you to have fevers, especially what we call gram-negative bacteria. There are certain toxins that when they die, actually, it causes you to have a fever. But fever is good because it ramps up your immune system. Makes it work better. Now, too high of fevers are bad. Again, it's all about balance here. But so that's another thing that can happen as a result.
So toxins are another major class of bacteria. So if you think of something like food poisoning, botulinum is one of the bacteria that we often associate with food poisoning, and it creates a toxin that causes nerve damage in our bodies and things. Others can be hemotoxins that affect the blood, toxins that affect proteins and those types of things. So all types of different toxins. So it's generally through tissue damage or releasing toxins. Now that kind of leads into what we're talking about next.
So we want to inhibit their growth, the ones that cause disease. And so one of the ways to do that is through spices, actually, which this is a really cool thing that you might not have thought about before. So you might think about what spices you like best in your food. One of my favorite all-time spices is cloves. I actually love the way that they smell. And so they're used a lot in baking, baked goods and things. And they make food more flavorful. So spices are good. If you didn't have salt or pepper or those types of things, food would taste very bland. Okay, so those are good things that God has basically provided, the plants, the minerals, things like that we can use. Now, they also, though, inhibit bacterial growth, and they can kill bacteria. And that's a really good thing. So this is a chart basically showing a lot of different spices and the proportion of bacteria that they inhibit. So for example, garlic and onion kill almost 100% of bacteria. Okay, they're very, very effective at killing bacteria. If you go down the list, so you can see a lot of cloves. There's my favorite, one of my favorites. It's about close to 90%. Things that are a little bit, and if you looked at these, but cinnamon here is a sweeter one, and it's, again, about 90%. Things like leafy ones like basil, parsley, dill tend to not be as good, about 50% inhibition. So it just varies. It just depends on what spice you have. Some are more effective against bacteria, some are more effective against fungi, some are better against certain types of bacteria, so it just varies. Now, what's interesting is this relates to temperature. Okay, so the farther south you go, the spicier the food gets, right? Most of us know that. If we're here in the United States, if we go to Mexico, or even if you go to China, I mean, especially southern parts of China, whoa, the food is spicy.
Even into India, Malaysia, places like that.
Yeah, you think of curry and things like that. So it gets very, very spicy. There's a reason for that, okay? Because the warmer the temperature is, the more chance that harmful bacteria will be able to grow. So the bacteria that like to live in us, like 98 degrees Fahrenheit, okay, that's the temperature they grow best at. If you go, the more likely you are to have bacteria that are harmful for you growing in places or in your food or wherever. So people through the years realized that spices actually prevent this kind of thing, prevent the bacterial growth and make the food healthy. So for example, the higher the temperature, which is what you're seeing here, the higher the temperature, the more proportions of recipes, like meat-based recipes, that you get spices in, okay? You tend to have that. The higher the temperature, the more spices you have. You see how it goes up? The more spices you have in the recipes. So they've done studies on this. This is like an actual scientific paper on this. This is, again, temperatures going this way, and then this is the percent of recipes per country that call for each spice. So this is the chilies. So again, the higher the temperature, the more recipes that have chilies in them. The more recipes that have garlic in them. The more recipes that have onion in them. Because they found out, probably through some trial and error, that it's good. It kills what's making people sick inside the food. So that's a good thing. So it's kind of cool. Maybe something you didn't know. And so I'm not saying go douse all your food with chilies or garlic or onion, but in country, especially before things like refrigeration were available to keep food good, you needed some way to kill the harmful things that were on it. And so this was a way to do that.
All right. So over here on the table, if we can have the camera come in over here a little bit closer, what you've done is you've actually cultured some bacteria. So when we talk about culturing bacteria, we've got a set of tubes here. This is a broth culture. And what are the two bacteria that you use?
So I'm using Staphylococcus epidermidis, so it's round, right? And
that's the one that we would find on our skin.
And I'm going to make you pronounce this one.
Which one do we have? Oh, Escherichia coli.
Escherichia
now,
coli.
Now, we use a lot of abbreviations in science because the words are hard to pronounce and we don't want to sound stupid. So we just say E. coli so we don't mispronounce Escherichia.
Yeah.
So these are different bacteria that are very easy to grow. They grow at room temperature and those types of things. So we've got them in broth here, and then you transferred them to these agar plates and these petri dishes.
I did.
Now, cool experimental idea here to check the inhibition factors that these different spices would have. So go ahead and explain what you did there.
So what I did first was I grew the bacteria in the liquid broth that we just talked about so I could get it in like a liquid form. And then what I did was I took a plate that also has agar on it. Okay, agar this is called like nutrient agar, but it has stuff that the bacteria can live on, so good stuff they can eat, but it also has a solidifying agent. So it makes it like, you think of gelatin, okay?
Yeah, it's basically made out of seaweed. It's a gelatin that we extract from seaweed.
And the bacteria can't eat it, so it stays solid basically.
But there are nutrients in there to help the bacteria
that they do eat, and they're able to do that. And so then what I did was, so I took, this is called a bacterial spreader. So I took the liquid from here and put it on here, and then I just kind of went like this, and spread the bacteria all around on the plate. So then what I did was, see these little discs on here? right? That's filter paper, basically, okay, or like a coffee filter. And I punched it out with a hole punch. And then what I did was I took a bunch of the spices, all of the spices that we have here on the table, and I soaked them in a spice water, basically.
Yes.
Spicy
to try and
water.
Get that disc to absorb the chemicals that are in the spice there.
And so I did this for both the E. coli and the S. epi, just to make it short there. And what I've done is, because it's really hard to see, so if the bacteria is being inhibited by the spice, you'll get what's called a zone of clearing around the disc. Now, it's really hard to see on camera, right? So what we did was I put a dashed line around the zone of inhibition, okay,
So
the
you
zone
can
of
kind
clearing.
of probably see some little white dots sprinkled, especially right over in this area, and they're spread all over the plate when we look at them close. But there's a very clear ring right here around this spot where you put some red chili powder on that.
Right. So this is cinnamon, thyme, ginger, and chili powder. So the other ones weren't very effective against, this is E. coli, but chili was, okay, which makes sense and we would expect that. This is another one with some other spices. Coriander had a little bit of effect against it, but the rest, black pepper and basil did not. And then, oh, you got to see this one.
This is the best.
Garlic. You probably can see that on the camera.
So not only does it get rid of vampires,
Yeah, I was going to say that.
gets rid of
Yes, it's
of
very
bacteria.
effective against E. coli as well. And cloves actually did a little bit of damage there as well, that they couldn't grow. Now, one thing I do have on the plate here is this says control, all right? So this disc, I did not put in any spice. I just put it in the water that I put all the other spices in. The reason I do a control is because if I saw a zone of clearing around the control, I know something is wrong. Okay? It means that I don't know I can trust these other ones. So, because something messed up. All right, so this is the S. epi, and I didn't really see any with the chili on this. There might be a little bit. It's a little hard to tell. At certain angles, I can see maybe a little bit of clearing. It's a little less, but those really didn't do much. These four, again, basil, coriander, didn't really see much with those. But then again, good old garlic to save the day here. Garlic really had an effect on S. epi. So did cloves, like with the E. coli, and the oregano, just a little bit of there. So we do get some clearing around those. It worked very nicely, so I was very happy with that. And I grew these for 2 days, by the way, so I would check them each day and see how the growth was, and that's how we did that. So it's pretty cool.
So each of these are what we would think of as natural antibacterials. So we have synthetic antibacterials, like we use alcohol and other things to help keep bacteria under control in certain environments, but these are natural things. So these are things that God has put into natural plants and things that we can grow around us to help us control those things in a natural way.
And we know for some of these what the chemical is. I'm not going to go through all the names because it's extensive, but we know what chemical is in them that actually causes the bacterial growth or inhibition, and they know it. Sometimes it will damage the cell wall, damage the cell membrane. It does different things to basically just kind of what we call lyse or break open the bacteria to cause it to die. So there's a lot of research actually in this because it's a natural element that we can use to control bacteria, which is good because we have a lot that are resistant to antibiotics. And so this is a way, not saying go drink a bunch of garlic or powder or something, or eat a bunch of
funny.
Yeah.
My daughter says there's never too much garlic on anything. So
I like it too.
I love garlic too. Lots of garlic powder and chilies, and those things can be great antibacterials. They're not magic bullets. They're not going to cure every disease all the time. And even when we find these things in nature, we shouldn't treat them in any mystical way.
Right.
We should treat them as things that God's given us to be able to benefit us in different ways.
Especially in a fallen world where they can
I
grow out
wonder
of control.
how Claude would taste with a little chili powder. I better not say that.
Claude's in
Somebody will get mad
trouble.
at me.
Do we have any more questions? Or
Let's see if we can find one more here. I think we kind of answered
I
most
answered
of
them all. That's how good I
Yes.
am. So
Mark asked, how did the capsaicin work? So that would be the main element in the
In
chilies,
chilies.
and hot peppers.
I'd have to
It worked
look.
okay.
Yeah, it
in
worked
some
okay. And
instances.
it probably depends on which bacteria you're talking about. And so
And
these are
E.
very lab-grown bacteria
E.
too.
coli is something that's very common in our gut. So if they were very susceptible to a lot of these spices,
Right.
eating those
That
foods
would
would
be
actually
bad.
do harm for our
Yeah.
bodies. You'd kind of have perpetual diarrhea if you didn't have lots of E. coli growing in your gut. Okay,
Yeah.
fun fact for the day.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys for joining us. There's some fascinating things to learn about this little invisible world, and we're going to keep exploring it. And until we see you next time, get out and enjoy God's amazing creation.